Hi, my name is Lizania Cruz, and I am a participatory artist and designer, originally from the Dominican Republic, now based in Brooklyn, New York. One thing that people ask me often is like, what does it mean to be a participatory artist? And I often respond that I work with people, that invite people to be part of the work and the content, and that has different modes and strategies. I worked a lot with oral history and research and thinking about how these things all merge and combine to do happenings in public space, and how do we activate the public sphere. For the past 3 years, I've been working on a project or body of work titled The Investigation of the Dominican Racial Imaginary. And this is like a research and participatory project where I'm looking at the ways in which the institution of the nation state of the Dominican Republic has repressed and erased our African heritage. And I'm thinking about this as like a criminal investigation because I believe this is like a crime that has been done to our identity and ways of understanding ourselves. And I'm also interested in like the ways the law as an institution and a system also has its own sets of bias. So I'm trying to question those as I do the work.
I interview a Haitian migrant that was a refugee from Haiti and went to the Dominican Republic, and after he actually had to flee the Dominican Republic because there was so much violence that he encountered there, and he went to Chile, where he also fled because there was a lot of violence that he encountered there. So I think like sitting in a story circle with this person made me also realize like I'm doing this work here in the US, but then there's like a lot of things I have to go home and kind of like understand and check and explore. I always think about ways that, you know, like it's easier to blame people. There's a lot of memes out there, you know, about how Dominicans are anti-Black and how we're racist and all of this. And so my approach is really thinking about the system that made us this way and the system that kind of like makes us behave this way and think about us this way. So that's why it's very much not on pointing fingers on people, but pointing fingers at the institution of the nation.
Particularly for the work that is at the Alma Lizania Cruz performing inquiry, I am looking at Samaná as we could say like a case study or a folder where Samaná is a town in the Dominican Republic, in the north area of the Dominican Republic, part of the peninsula. And it's a town that has like strong links with the African-American history of the United States during the era of Boyer, when the Hispaniola was the nation of Haiti. He invited emancipated Black Americans, African Americans to go and settle in the Dominican Republic in exchange of land and work in the land.
So I kind of knew this history, we sort of know very surface level in the DR that, you know, there's like African Americans that settled in Samaná, there's the Cocolos, there's like a huge migration that happened in Samaná. But I didn't really know on like the depth of it. I decided to go there, I think early last year. I got some funding to do research, and basically I was there for like 2 months almost, And the third day I was there, I went to the AME church, which I already knew that was there. I had talked to some anthropologists that is connected to the church, and I didn't know to the depth of what was there. And I think like I went into the pastor's office, and that was the first thing I saw, which was the stamps of Richard Allen. And I asked him, like, who is that? Because I heard of him through my research, but I didn't know either, like, the specific of his life and his importance. And he went on telling me, like, the importance of the church and who was Richard Allen. And so it was shocking to me that this history was so prevalent in my country. And Samaná is a place that most people go to the beach. Like, it's a town, it's like a beautiful peninsula. It, in my opinion, has the best beaches in the Caribbean. And we often go and forget the people there, and we go as tourists in some way, shape, or form. So I've been working with the archives of Lizardo, who you see in the video, and there's a print. He's one of the witnesses of the investigation. He's, I would say, like the primary witness. And Fradique's archives are a UNESCO World Heritage Archive for the transatlantic slave, the Middle Passage in the Caribbean. And Fradique was very interested, he was a sociologist, very interested in syncretism and kind of like researching specifically the time when the island was, one island was Haiti. So through his archives, I found this dance and this music, el Bamboulá, and then I talked to an anthropologist, Ryan Hamilton, who also has done like deep research in Samaná, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you should talk to the grandson of it. You're interested in Valdivia? Yeah, her grandson is alive." So then I went there, went to Samaná, and I met with the Professor Martire, and then I was like, what if can we do a performance of El Bamboulá? And he was like, oh yeah, I've been teaching the youth in the school, how would you want to do it? And I was like, it needs to be in the sidewalk, and I was trying to explain my practice, because a part of my practice is how do we use the public space and kind of question the public sphere within these narratives. So, yeah, we did it, and then that became part of a happening that folks in the DR were able to presence, and then it becomes kind of like an archive to the work.
So there's a silkscreen of the evidence of El Bamboulá, and this was sort of like the announcement and the invitation for the happening. So kind of I worked backwards on this one, because when I was there, I designed this invitation so people would know about the happening, and it was all done, the invitation was all done digitally. But I always wanted to do a silkscreen of it. So it sort of also becomes a register for the happening itself, and sort of how do you know what time, when the event took place, and what was going on. I'm also learning about Fradique as I go, because he was such a character in Dominican culture, and sort of like trying to bring into light the African heritage in the Dominican Republic. He has a book that it's called African Culture in Santo Domingo. You know, in that book, he goes around kind of gathering the terminology of miscegenation in Santo Domingo as a colony, and this encompasses, like, you know, the west part as well as the east part of the island. So for instance, in the terminology diagram, which is like behind us here, this piece is a documentation of a happening I did in Santo Domingo, where I asked people to fingerprint with black how they identify themselves, and with red how they've been identified or called or named. And the diagram comes from this book of Radiques and his research looking at the different terminologies from the time of the colony and the time after the colony and contemporary terminology. And this was one of the first times I was able to kind of like understand even words that we use in the Dominican Republic as slang and how they're attached to this like construct of race and categorization, right? So yeah, like I keep looking and finding his research and sort of like readdressing how that could be incorporated into the work today. Doña Bertilia I also found through the archives of Fradique Lizardo, and she was an elder in Samaná, and the tradition of the Bamboulá, she's called the queen of El Bamboulá, and she was able to sort of keep the tradition alive, and she would commemorate La Fiesta de San Rafael. Yeah, I've kind of reconnecting with Bertilia as I go, but I'm interested in her because she, from what I see on her imagery and what I read about her, she sounds like you know, a true matriarchal like character, and if I feel like if I would talk to her today, she would be so proud of her African heritage and of her blackness. But yeah, like I've been kind of thinking about how traditions are kept and how, you know, we learn things from our elders, and what happens when these traditions are not recorded, they're not passed along, who take care of those traditions, like who takes care of that memory. And yeah, I think like some parts we have the archives, but then I feel very fortunate to be able to talk to, for instance, her grandson, El Profesor Martire. But yeah, so this print in particular, it's a lino cut, and most of the prints that I've been doing for the investigation are a combination of either a technique of printmaking, photolithography, lino cut, etching, and then I used chincolé as like a way to highlight or bring into light a characteristic of the print or of this evidence. And for instance, with Doña Bertilia, I was like really excited about her head wrap because it was something that in all the photographs that I saw of her, she was using, and yeah, I wanted to highlight that aspect of it. So that's like the chincolé part. Part of the investigation, I've been doing these timelines, and I'm thinking about timelines not in the linear way because I think that's like a very colonial mindset to look at history, but I am mostly interested if we can look at history through the lens of relationships. And what I've done in order to think about that way is that I've created this Venn diagram, which you could see also in the prints of the suspects and the witnesses. And the Venn diagram is sort of split into the economy and the product side of what could be extracted from the land. The nation as like the government as an institution, and then the middle part is religion, and then the top part is culture and folklore, and then the bottom part is the resistance, right? Because there's always a side that is in resistance to the hegemony, right? And so the timeline is loosely organized in that way, but it's like a compilation of all my research while I was getting prepared to go to Samaná and the different archives. And of course, once I landed there, I found new things and kept adding them. So I also wanted to juxtapose moments from the present. So I'm using the slide projector to project on top of the archive with photographs that I took while I was there. Photographs of people that I interview, photographs of people, artisans that I, you know, took, like bought products from and then interview them for the project. And just like the market, what was it like to be in this town? And then as a backdrop to that is actually a photo of the area and the place where Doña Bertilia was born and where she had her house, which is like completely abandoned and destroyed. And it's so saddened to see how these places that at some point were memorialized as like a place of culture and heritage, because I believe it was in the 80s they built this house to kind of like commemorate that this was a place where the party of San Rafael and Bertilia lived, and now it's just like an abandoned area. So yeah, it's like a layered timeline of like the present and the past, what's found and what's not there. Because like one of the things that I'm very mindful, as you know, Sadia Hartman tells us all the time, is that when we're looking at the archives, what is there and what's not there? What is the story that is actually not being told or invisibilized by the archive itself?